So guys, we are here with two very experienced online and in-person coaches. So we have Carl Hardwick and Sam Smith, and they are going to be expanding on some of the 6 principles for coaching any client anywhere and giving some practical examples of how they put them into practice with their clients to help you in your coaching practice. So guys, I'm going to ask you each principle, and I'll then ask you to give, again, some examples of how you put them into action in your program designs, in your communication with clients, and in how you really structure your coaching service. So the first principle of coaching any client anywhere is taking a local remote approach to coaching. And that means if you're an individual who's trying to build up their coaching service, trying to compete with big online remote coaching businesses and trying to appeal and attract clients from all over the world, that's going to be really challenging unless you have a big marketing budget and you absolutely love marketing as well. And for most coaches, I think it's fair to say that isn't the reality. So Carl, I'll open this one up to you first. If you were a coach, you are a coach, taking a local remote approach, how would you go about that?
Yeah, first I would identify who is it that I'm trying to coach, right? And you know, I know Sam will expand on this a little bit, but if I'm trying to coach, or if you're trying to coach 100% highly competitive athletes, and you start to look at taking a local remote kind of position on your coaching practice, that might not work because you might not have enough highly competitive athletes in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, right? You know what I mean? So it's like, understand who it is that you're trying to coach, and are those people actually surrounding you? For most of us, we're coaching people in general population. We're coaching people to be healthier, fitter, so on and so forth, right? So those people are around us. And when we look at remote coaching or coaching someone online and the principles that sit inside of that, the relationship will be a big piece of that. So developing a relationship with someone that's across the world is doable, but it's a lot harder than developing a relationship with someone that you can meet at a coffee shop and have a monthly consultation with, or that can come inside of your facility or inside of your garage once or twice a week, and you can actually see them move, you can see them exercise. So taking that local remote approach is just, it's easier, it's more sustainable, and it's a better option for people that need that human to human interaction.
And then Sam, you have like a lot of clients who work remotely with you around the world, but then you do have some who are local and actually train under your wing as well in the facility. Does it enhance the relationship, being able to have those clients in person?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, that's, as Carl mentioned, that's the foundation of any coach-client relationship, is the relationship, and cultivating that. You need to see people and feel them and see their body language, their energy, everything. So being able to see people in person is a huge value add for coaching. And so especially somebody starting out who's trying to develop their business or their career in coaching, it would behoove them to look more remotely, or not, excuse me, not remotely, locally, so that you can bring people into your facility, you can see them, you can meet them, and then maybe eventually you move that into more of a remote setting. But yes, there is a substantial difference in the clients I work with in person and see, or who you can live within an hour from my office and I can go to lunch with them or whatnot, than the ones across the globe. That's a much different service and a different type of relationship, and imposes different types of challenges. But yes, that is a big piece of starting that coaching journey.
Great perspective to have. Thanks, guys. We'll move on to principle number 2 now, which is to always prescribe what your client is capable of doing. Sam, especially when you're working online with clients, how do you make sure you do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because I think coaches, we have all these ideas and things we want to give people, and it can be easy to look past what they actually need and just give them what we think they need. And that can, of course, lead to expectations that weren't expected, and results that we didn't want, etc. So, of course, always starting with clear communication up front in your initial consult to dissect, why are you in front of me right now? Like, what's the goal? Where is that taking us? Where do we currently sit relative to that goal? And then, of course, we can highlight that more through testing and assessment to get some data behind, like, where you actually at compared to where you want to go. Because that's essentially what you're trying to do, is you're trying to give somebody a little bit more than what they can currently handle to keep pushing them forward, but not too much to where it's too intense or it's too straining on the system to where they burn out, or if anything they get worse or injured.
And obviously, a huge part of prescribing what your client is capable of is that assessment that you do initially and ongoing with them. Carl, I'll ask you, are there different practicalities when it comes to conducting those things online with a client that isn't in the gym in front of you versus when you are in person with them?
Yeah, definitely. So just to expand on what Sam was saying, I would look at 3 factors as being really important, right? Like what are your client's previous experiences in exercise? What does the assessment tell you that you're going to perform in a remote setting? And what's the feedback that you're getting from that client ongoingly? So when we look at assessing someone online, that's just going to look different than in person, because we can't tell someone to put their arms overhead and give us a squat and then, change some things up because we see some obvious discrepancies and we can fix them right there on the spot, instead of saying, sometimes when we do that in a remote setting, because we don't have that immediate feedback, if we're not on Zoom or something like that and taking them through that assessment, we could call that a failed squat, right? But if we were in person, we could have just said, yep, shift those hips back a little bit to start, and that could have fixed everything. So the feedback loop is a bit longer in a remote setting. It's not as immediate. So the assessment is definitely going to look different. And we have to, that's not saying that you can't do an assessment or you shouldn't do an assessment, because that's not a great excuse to just forget about and say, I can't do this effectively. So you have to work around it and learn through doing a lot of assessments and how you need to prescribe that. And based on your initial consultation with your client, what are the words that you need to use in your whatever platform you're using to prescribe that assessment? What are the words that you're using to tell them to go through that? How are they filming it? What are the angles at that they're filming it? If they're on Zoom in your live time with them, give them some expectations. And this is what we're going to do. Watch these videos. I want you to get ready for it, because I can't actually take you through this thing on the other side of the laptop, right? So there's a lot of different ways to work around it, but to get to the point of it, it has to be different. And the expectations are that it's going to be different than a live one-to-one assessment.
So it sounds like you have to be extra clear, concise, and offer a lot of direction to your client up front, and then also accept the trade-off that you are going to lose some nuance of assessment when it is performed online versus in person.
Yeah, and understand what the assessment is that you're giving your client, and is it a necessary assessment for them? Because what we want to do in the remote setting is we want to decrease drag, or the amount of things that we're asking clients to do, not only on an ongoing basis, but within a training program, right? So look at your assessment and your assessment protocol very critically and say, will I use this assessment for every single person? And if not, that's okay, right? Like, you can give personalized assessments to clients based on who they are, what their goals are, what their experiences are, so on and so forth. Just be really clear with them is what I would say.
Great. Thanks, guys. So principle number 3 now is to always align behavior and nutrition with a client's exercise program. Sam, how do you work on these 2 areas with your clients in your program design online?
Man, that's a real heavy one, because nutrition should always imply behavior, because we don't move a muscle without a motive. So we're not going to make a decision with food without a deeper reason for that. So getting people to be more aware of their nutritional habits, you need a lot of great conversation and communication with them. So I always kind of like present this idea to clients that there's a scale of 0 to 10, and 10 are macros, like getting specific macros for this person. And 99% of the people I see, or maybe 90% of the people I see, are at like a 2 or 3 on that scale. But then they come to me thinking that I'm going to be giving them macros. But there's so much that goes into getting to the point where macros becomes a strong argument for that person to help move them to the next level in their development or goal. So just even a few things like, do you go to bed at the same time? How's your sleep quality? How much water are you getting per day? Are you eating at consistent times throughout the day? Like these rhythm pieces and executing on that consistently are the foundational aspects that people need before you move into more nuanced approaches with nutrition. So having a discussion with people is extremely important so they recognize how important that is. Because if I just tell somebody, like, no, I don't give macros to people right away, they're going to be very like, whoa, really? I thought I was going to give macros. Like, how am I supposed to, get lean and shredded or, win the CrossFit games? So it always comes back to great conversation anytime you're going to get into behaviors and subsequently nutrition. So yeah, that would be very, very important.
It sounds like there's a lot of clear communication and conversation that has to happen around connecting clients to those behaviors and why they are making certain nutritional decisions as well.
Yeah, and making them more aware of what they're currently doing relative to where they think they need to be or where they want to go. Because they can, of course, assume that I need to have X and Y for nutrition, but they're really A and B right now, but they're not even really aware that they're an A and B. So I have to kind of help them, because if I just tell them, you don't deserve these things, they're going to be people are going to get defensive. So I have to let them come to the realization, oh yeah, you know what, I don't do any of this, and I probably need to be doing these things before I get into these more challenging pieces to execute on day in, day out.
I think that is such incredible value that a coach can really add to their client, though, and it really is one of the things that can differentiate a coach from just an online template or following a paleo diet or something like that.
Yeah.
You have the ability to have those conversations and, again, align the client with the intention behind nutrition and behavior.
Yes.
Carl, I'll ask the same question to you. How do you work on nutrition and behavior with your clients online?
Yeah, I think this one actually bleeds into the last principle of prescribing what clients are capable of. To not elaborate on everything that Sam just said, but to just add, a little bit of my thoughts on top of that, everything that Sam said, plus we have to understand what a client is capable of right now, because even if a client is at, Sam's 8 out of 10 scale, and we're like, okay, now it's time for macros, right? Like why are we prescribing macros based on what we want the outcome to be, right? Because if it's what Sam is saying, like lean and shredded, I need to be the lowest amount of body fat percentage that I can possibly be, on board, right? It's like, yeah, let's get very specific and let's nail these macros and let's make some adjustments as we go if we're moving closer to that goal or not, and we can account for those with weekly check-ins or however we ensure that we're moving toward that goal. But if we don't look at what that client is capable of doing, like let's say it's a client that's like, I'm on that 8 out of 10 scale, but the thought of me putting my food on a food scale really stresses me out based on my previous experiences with food. It's like we have to take a step back and we have to say, okay, like, is this the best prescription for this person relative to, are they capable of doing it and do they want to do it, right? So maybe with that client, it's you lay out like a portioning plan with them, and you're like, your outcome may still be, let's get as shredded as possible, but you understand that, the way that you're going to get there most successfully is not through a macro prescription and say, okay, have at it. It's, hey, this is an idea of, this is how we can portion protein, carbs, fat on a daily basis. And I want you to have 3, 4, 5 of these meals every day. And then, okay, the client's really compliant there over a month or two. And it's like, okay, now let's get more specific if needed or not. Like, you can actually dial back and be like, okay, we did our job. You have an idea or an understanding of, how you should fuel yourself on a daily basis and have great energy in the gym, have great energy when you wake up, and go to sleep very, very effectively. It's like, cool, like, we're out. We don't need to over prescribe there. So it's considering what are they capable of doing and what do they actually need, right? Like, what's the lowest hanging fruit for that client?
So always looking at their starting point and then also what the so-called end goal is for that client before you align those behavior and exercise nutrition principles.
Yeah, and you have to have a framework for that though, right? Because if we're flying blind and we're like, I'm going to give this person that and this person this, and like it's not going to be, we're not going to be efficient coaches, right? And every time we have a client in front of us, we're going to have to reinvent the wheel. And that's why, Sam's framework that he just laid out, Sam probably goes at every client with that framework, and he understands where they sit inside of there, and then he prescribes based on where they sit. So that's him having a very effective framework that he can scale across his entire client load. So you have to have a framework that you're working inside of. You can't just make it up as you go.
And I know you and James obviously teach that inside of CCP, like the life, fuel, and person framework when designing those programs. All right, guys. Well, we'll move on to number 4 now, which is hone your communication skills. Could you guys just share each a couple of essentials that a coach must remember around online communication with their clients?
I'll start.
Go for
So I've said this a few times, and I think I've said this in a few conversations with you, Georgia. Online coaching is different because the thing that the client sees every day is their training program, right? Like they actually judge you on a daily basis based on what they're pulling up in their training program, unless you're giving another service and you're giving, a message every morning and you're giving a thought of the day and you're giving other things. But if you're coaching someone inside of a model where they get a training program every day and they have a consultation 1 time per month, you have to understand that 30 minutes per month with your client is not enough usually in an online setting, because we're human beings, right? We have different emotions that flow through us based on how we feel that day. And imagine, looking at your program design and thinking a little bit like, this actually isn't for me. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm not even capable of doing this. What's happening in that client's head as they go through that conversation with themselves? They're losing trust from their coach, right? And the coach may be doing everything right. They're replying to comments, they're replying to messages, they're doing monthly consultations, but we're 21 days after the last monthly consultation, and this thing has been brewing in the client's mind for the past 3 weeks, and trust is just going like this, right? So a coach needs to be, in an online setting, a coach has to have a great strategy in how they communicate with their clients as a whole, and also have a great strategy in how they're going to shift that communication strategy up to coach someone that has individual needs, right? Because if Georgia, if I'm coaching you and we have an initial consultation and you're like, every time I pull up a training program, I second guess it. I second guess myself. I don't have any confidence in what I'm doing. Like, what's that telling me as a coach? It's telling me that I probably need to check in on you, right? Like if we start a new cycle or something like that, and I think I'm giving you what you can actually perform, but I know in my head that you're going to doubt that and you're going to doubt yourself, I probably need to communicate with you a little bit more than I do with this athlete that I have over here that's extremely self-sufficient. No matter what I give them, they crush it. We jump on monthly consultations. It's 5-minute talking about their program and their nutrition and their behavior, and it's 25 minutes of BSing, right? It's like you have to coach those two individuals differently.
That relies on the client communicating with you as well. Like that onus is not just on the coach, but a client has to know that they need to communicate with you. Like they're going into this thing without any ideas around what it means to be a good client. How do you set the client up to know what you need from them?
Yeah, Sam has some good pieces on client expectations, because I know we talked about this last week, I think, when we were talking about the remote coaching idea. Do you want to hit on like what you're doing in expectation and how important that is?
Yeah. So I'll add the piece that I was going to discuss from what Carl was kind of starting with, which was a great point around how the client's getting their training every day. Like that's how they're perceiving this relationship and this service offering every day. And so I always come back to the triangle of trust, which is NCCP: caring, competency, and consistency. And that has to be, for a coach, especially in a remote setting, that has to be like your anchor points for a successful service that you're giving somebody. You need to be consistent with what you're going to offer them, which is, of course, training, the touch points that you're going to stick to on a weekly basis, all the little things that go into that. Competency, you need, of course, be growing and developing as a coach in your practice and your ability to offer value to the client. and then caring. You obviously need to care about your clients. Like, you need to care about their success and show that you're connected to them and their goals, not as much as they are, but that you have some skin in the game. And then Carl brings up a great point about setting expectations, which is so important because, again, a client-coach relationship is a triad, which is there's three pieces. There's the coach, the client, and then your relationship. So up front, the coach has to set clear expectations of what is my job, what is in my job, and what am I going to be delivering on consistently, and then what do I expect them to be delivering on consistently. And you, of course, have to get there in the conversation. I don't lead with that because sometimes people have previous experiences with coaches in different settings, different sports, that could have left a real positive impact, and there were certain principles in that relationship that really resonated with them that they want to try to keep within this new relationship. And also on the flip side, they could have had some poor relationships in the past that have kind of scarred them, and they're hesitant to be a part of a relationship that has pieces that tie into what that experience was. So it is important to ask, what was your previous experience with other coaches, and what did that look like, and what were some of the pros and cons? Because then that can help me mold how I'm going to approach this client, and then we can get into more specifics on, okay, what are we going to expect from each other, and that's going to allow us to both thrive, because then we know there's no grayness. We know exactly what we need to be doing each day, each week, each month, and that can allow both of us to thrive.
Yeah, I think that's a good point where, communication also has to be personalized, not just the program. If Sam asks one of his, new clients that he's onboarding, what were some positive and negative experiences that you've had with your previous coach, and one of the negative experiences was I felt like I was kind of flying blind because I never knew what I was doing, why I was doing it, and I never knew what to expect in communication. It's like, I'm pretty sure Sam's going to be like, write that note where it's like, this is how I'm going to communicate with this client. I'm going to ensure they always know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and they don't feel like they're flying blind.
Yeah, and our fifth principle, which we're going to get into now, is to always use technology to your advantage. And that's obviously connected to what we were just talking about, because it is different platforms and technology options that help us enhance that communication. Sam, what are some of the ways that you use technology, number one, to help with client communication?
Yes. Well, I use Zoom for all our video calls, which is extremely helpful. Much better than Skype ever was. And then, of course...
Sam's sponsored by Zoom, by the way.
Yeah, I got a big 7-figure deal with Zoom. That's a joke. And I also use TrueCoach. That's kind of the platform that I use for all the designing, notes, data tracking. But there is another source that I'm sure Carl will talk about that's within OPEX now. But that allows me to be efficient with my time, organized with my data and my notes, and it also allows my clients to have a great tool to review past results and lifts and metrics, et cetera, and data, so that they can see, so they have a small insight into kind of the vision for them. Because as Carl mentioned, some people want to be more engaged with their journey and the training and the thoughts of how I'm thinking about moving them down the road, where some people are just like, yeah, just tell me what to do, I'll do it. But you have to personalize that based on what they need. So Zoom and then TrueCoach would be kind of the my two big pieces that I utilize.
What about you, Carl?
Yeah, the same, right? If we go back to, the evolution of online personalized fitness, it started with email, then it went to Google Sheets when that became a thing online, and you can see live time inputs and outputs. And then Fitbot/TrueCoach came into the game in late 2015, 2016, and we adopted that hard, right? Because, Casey's a good friend of ours, and he built that thing to work very effectively with the model in which we coach. So it just worked, right? But, as this thing evolves and we start to look at how are we going to coach people one-to-one utilizing technology in the future, We have to evolve it in a way that works perfectly with the way that we want to coach clients. And right now we use TrueCoach, and it works great for delivering training programs. We created our own platform, CoachRx, inside of just for CCP coaches only, to house data, to house consultation information, to house program design, build outs, and all of that. But we're still not there yet on having a complete system of efficiency across the board. And we have some cool things coming out with CoachRx to rectify that. But what we want to steer clear of, especially in this model, because right now, if you Google, fitness coaching AI, right? There's a lot of things coming out right now where it's trying to make this thing really efficient for the client and low barrier for the client, where training programs are built automatically and the AI recognizes what they succeeded in or not, and it shifts the program design the next day. And that's going to come. It's not going to come. It's already here, right? And there's some platforms that are pretty good there. But what we have to continue to leverage is the relationship, right? And relative to how we believe training programs should be delivered, every person should be doing their ideal version of fitness. And for us, that comes through a personalized training program. So AI and learning what people need to do for fitness, in our opinion, will never be effective if a robot is doing it, right? Because based on personalizing communication, right? Personalizing communication is way more important than A, B, and C in the training program. Way more important, right? And I think Sam would agree there. So a robot is not going to be able to successfully do that. So when we look at technology, we're building out what we think will be the best way to deliver this thing. But based on what model you coach in and how you want to deliver fitness, that would be different for a lot of different people. I mean, based on what Sam's using right now, that's best practice at this moment, plus CoachRx. That will probably look different in 12 months, and that's what we're trying to solve for right now.
Yeah, so it sounds like there is now and into the future a lot of technology, automation, and things that can help efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
But the human relationship that we base our coaching on, that's never going to be replaced by technology.
Nope.
We're just going to have better ways to deliver it to more people in far and wide places.
Yeah, coaching is just it's nuanced, right? It's not as simple as, I turn on my autopilot in my car and it stays in my lanes and it turns when it needs me to turn. Like those are all rules of the street that we can all take a course and understand, and there's no variability there. But when we look at coaching and coaching a human, there's so many variables, right? That it would just be very difficult to create software, a program that makes everything 100% efficient, 100% good in terms of relationship building, program design, so on and so forth, and leaves the client feeling happy and fulfilled 100% of the time. I mean, in our opinion, and we're very biased, that comes through human relationships.
Yeah. So guys, we'll move on to principle number 6 now, which is to create and build autonomous clients. And this is something that we talk about not just relative to a local remote client. We talk about it with the clients that train in our gym as well. Carl, do you mind starting by just explaining what I mean exactly about building client autonomy?
Yeah, so it's hand holding, right? Like we don't want to build that coach-client relationship based on the coach having to hold the client's hand throughout the entire journey. Maybe in the beginning there's some hand holding that needs to take place to teach the client how to be autonomous and how to think for themselves inside of the gym. But this idea is extremely important when we start talking about remote coaching, even if it's local remote, right? Because if we have remote clients that have zero amounts of autonomy, we're not going to be able to coach them effectively, right? So think about what that would mean for us. That would mean that your client trains at 5:30 in the morning. Your client goes to the gym. You have rowing intervals programmed for your client. Maybe they have 4 rowers and they're all taken. If the client can't figure out what they should do in that scenario, they're going to text you at 5:30, right? If you're not setting expectations up that I'm not going to respond to your text messages at 5:30 when you have a question, we're setting that client up for failure, right? So we want to build autonomous clients that understand how to shift their design, if we have rowing intervals programmed at 5:30 in the morning and they don't have access to a rower now, it's like, what do they do, right? So we need them to be able to eventually make that decision on their own without us holding their hand through that. But that comes through expectations.
Sam, what are some of the ways that you build client autonomy so that you're not getting blown up at 5:30 a.m. with those kinds of questions?
Yeah, no, it's such a huge part of, in my opinion, being a successful coach. Is the word that always comes to my mind when I think about autonomy and clients is responsibility. You're trying to cultivate more responsibility in the client for them to recognize that all of the things I'm doing are on me and none of it's on my coach. Like, I'm making all the decisions, I'm doing the training, it's all on me, and by doing so that's very empowering, and that creates more independence, that creates more awareness, that creates an improved ability to critically think about things, arguably. And so that's like where you're trying to push people throughout this journey. And as Carl mentioned, setting clear expectations up front is so important so that so you and your client are on the same page, because you need to be, for example, 5:30 in the morning, if a client is texting you at 5:30 in the morning, one, you shouldn't be responding. Like, I clearly lay that out to people. I said, hey, I'm on True Coach from this time to this time, Monday through Saturday morning. And if you need to get a hold of me quickly, these are the ways to do it. If it's less pertinent, these are the ways to do it, and I will get back to you and see this probably within 2 to 3 days. But it's super clear, so that if they do bring it to my attention, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? It's like, well, let's review what we chat about, our expectations. Was that clear with what I laid out? It's like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. I'm like, exactly. Okay, so I did what I told you I would do. Now, why is this challenging for you, or why is this causing some resentment? And now we got to break through that and move that forward. So that's huge. That's super important. And I think the starting point is clear expectations, and then as a coach, executing on that consistently. And it's hard to say in like clear, concise wording how you do that through communication and consulting, but you're trying to. So it's very nuanced and it's very unique to the person, where it's like you're listening to what they're saying and how they're describing things and what's going on in their life and their training, and then you're trying to pull from that a few things that you see as opportunities for them to grow and take on a little bit more responsibility. And so then you try to lean into that area and talk a little bit more about that with them, and then try to give them maybe some tools to implement for the next few weeks or month. Like, okay, well, why don't you try to like, let me give you an example. It's like, well, Sally comes in at the same time I train, and she's really obnoxious and loud. It really bothers me, and it always affects my training, and I can't focus as well on my session, and it's always when I have to do these intervals that are really hard, and so I feel like I'm not doing as well. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And you're not obviously going to be changing your training time anytime soon. And she's like, yeah, I have to go at the same time on these days. Okay. And have you told Sally to be quiet? It's like, yeah, I have. Okay, well, maybe this is an opportunity for you to recognize that, yes, this person's here, they're making noise, and I can't control that. But what I can control is my effort, my attention to detail, everything that's within my control. I can manage, and maybe I need to work on honing that in, because right now I'm letting this other person control my outcome in this situation, and they have no bearing on that. And so helping people like be more aware of those things can be so helpful, and then developing holistically to where you get to the point where you could have people in the gym like that, but it doesn't bother them. Like, yeah, it doesn't matter what those people are saying. Like, this is what I'm doing today, and I need to focus on this. And that would show you that they're moving towards autonomy. Like, that's what you want out as a coach. So very, very important and challenging nonetheless, but it always starts with clear expectations for both the client and the coach, and then it's evolving over time based on that journey.
I think that's wonderful advice. And just to wrap up that one segment, the actual program design and what the client gets, that has to affect their ability to develop autonomy as well. How do you tailor their program design to make sure it is something that is supporting that end goal?
Yeah, I mean, it's in language, right? So language is very important in program design. And an example of that is, and I'll just go off of Sam's interval conversation, what language are we using to convey what effort we want this piece to be at, right? So be very consistent in your language, and you want your clients to see something and understand that we want them to eventually have our brains, right? Where it's like, okay, Sam's using this language in this interval. Let's say the language is sustained power, right? Sam had a conversation with his client and he talked about what sustained power is and what it looks like relative to a 2-hour piece versus a 30-second piece. So when his client sees sustained power and they see 60 seconds rest times 30, right? They can go in and they understand what RPM or pace per 500 meters that should be at. If a good practice or a good thing to kind of check on, are you building autonomy for your clients, is if you've been coaching someone for 2 years and you're using language with them and they're asking you, what should my RPM be or what should my pace per 500 meters be, and you've given them that piece and you've been extremely consistent in the languaging, if they're asking you that question, you know that either you're doing a bad job of building autonomy for them inside of their program design, or they're doing a bad job of understanding what you're saying on a week-by-week basis over the past 2 years. So think about the language that you're using and give your clients pieces of work where you give them the ability to be autonomous, right? If George is coaching me and she says, I want your 3-minute intervals at 66 RPM, and we're doing this, very, we're periodizing this, and we're 6 weeks down the road and now we're at 67 RPM. Like, she's not actually giving me the ability to have autonomy in this. And that's not bad, right? That's just one method. But what if you were to tell me sustained power? Would I be able to self-organize and figure out what my pace should be over multiple sets, right? So we have to build autonomy in the program design, and that usually comes through expectations up front and consistent language ongoingly in the program design, and not changing that language every week so the client's trying to learn a new language.
And as a coach as well, that means that we need to value the learning process for the client and not just throw workouts at them that they can do without thinking. It is asking that client to really reflect on what they learn each session and setting them up to recognize that that is one of the things we're trying to achieve too. It's not just the physical, it's the mental learning that happens alongside that too.
Yeah. And that has to be personalized as well, right?
Absolutely.
If you know that your clients like to listen to podcasts, maybe use at podcast pace, right? Where it's like you can understand, you can comprehend, this is the pace that you should go when you go out for this run, right? Maybe you put at Metallica pace if you're like, okay, this should be a little bit faster, a little more upbeat. So just personalize the language as well and create an environment where your client has the ability to actually learn through that program design, because not all clients are nerdy coaches either, right? So they don't really care about understanding the nuances of what's inside of our brain.
Well, guys, really appreciate you both reflecting on those 6 principles and how over the years you've put them into practice working with your clients. Now, I hope that this helps you guys take this principle-based approach to coaching any client anywhere and really be able to use it as like a guiding light and something that you can reflect back on. So when you're coaching your clients and when you're trying to develop your coaching practice and service, you can always come back to them and make sure that you are giving people something that's personalized, that's premium, and that really stands out in the market, whether it's in person, whether it's remote, or whether it's some mixture of the two.